Hello, everyone. This is Dylan Lawrence Moore of the Volitional Science Network coming to you today to go over an article that I found which lays out Bernie Sanders' 10-point plan for Democrats. And I found these 10 points very interesting, and I feel that it warrants going over because they do bring up quite a few important things that a nation, I believe, needs to discuss. So I found this article on truthdig.com, which appears to be a very progressive news outlet, which was linking to a Washington Post article. So I'll put both of these links in the description below. But the article goes something like this. While affirming that he strongly disagrees with former Newt Gingrich, who led the GOP in the House in the mid-1990s on virtually every issue, Senator Bernie Sanders is calling on Democrats in Congress to rip a page out of Georgia Republicans' playbook by creating and aggressively pushing a new progressive version of the contract with America in order to galvanize the nation, offer real solutions to its most urgent problems, and go beyond being simply anti-Trump. So far so good. If you're a Democrat and you're kind of sick of the fact that the Democrats aren't able to come up with any sort of platform that addresses problems in the nation, other than being like, orange man bad. I think this opening statement has a very strong resonating quality because, there are issues in the country and they need to be addressed. And so far, the Democrats haven't been able to come up with anything other than orange man bad. So it continues. In stark contrast to Gingrich's original version, radical right-wing agenda full of tax breaks for the wealthy, massive cuts to programs vital to working families, and racist and cruel bills to reform welfare and our criminal justice system. I'm doing quotes when there's quotes in the article. Sanders argues in a Washington Post op-ed on Thursday that Democrats should instead forge a vision that reflects the needs of working Americans centered on economic, political, social, racial, and environmental justice. Ooh, we're already getting into that social justice warrior propaganda speak. It's not my favorite, but I'm going to say it's my favorite for dramatic effect. So, while celebrating the blue wave in the midterms that saw Democrats reclaim control of the U.S. House and achieve major wins in state houses and governors' mansions nationwide. Yeah, that blue wave, which was the weakest retake of the House, like in American history. I don't know if it was the number one, but it was up there because normally the House, or actually both sides of Congress, but particularly the House, shifts wildly to the other side in the midterms during a presidential election. So if the president's a Democrat, they swing wildly to Republican, and if the president's Republican, it swings wildly to Democrat. And this was the least wild swing that I don't remember if it was all history, but it's the least wild in a long time. So if we're going to call that a blue wave, great. Sanders writes that while it is clear a majority of the American people rejected President Trump's agenda of benefiting the wealthy and the powerful, as well as his racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and religious bigotry, it simply is not good enough for Democrats to just be the anti-Trump party. Well, I'm assuming that the American people have rejected Trump's racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and religious bigotry, mostly because it doesn't exist. If you have any evidence, and when I say evidence, I don't mean an article alluding to the fact that Trump is any of these things. If you have any evidence that Trump is actually a racist, is actually a sexist, is actually homophobic, is actually xenophobic, and is actually a religious bigot, please send them to me, because in the entire time that, leading up to the election and after the election, and we've had president in office, I have yet to see one single example of any of this stuff. So please send it to me if you can find it. If not, I'm just going to assume that the American people have rejected it because it doesn't exist. So, if Democrats, he writes, want to keep and expand their majority in the House, take back the Senate, and win the White House, Democrats must show the American people that they will aggressively stand up and fight for working families in this country. Black, white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American, men, women, gay, or straight. This means addressing the crisis of the broken criminal justice system and reforming inhumane immigration policies. It also means fighting to expand a middle class that has been disappearing for more than 40 years, reducing inequality in both income and wealth, which has disproportionately hurt African Americans and Hispanics, and aggressively combating climate change. The most urgent threat facing our planet. All this sounds great, Bernie. Let's see these points. So, specifically, argues Sanders, the new Democratic majority in the House should spend its first 100 days next year passing an unmistakably bold legislative agenda, which includes, here's our 10 points. Number 1, increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour and indexing it to the median wage growth thereafter. So, oh boy. Now, for those of you who've been watching me, and particularly the show that and conversations I've been doing with Nima Majur of economicsjunkie.com, you'll know that I have been converted to what's called modern money theory. And if you know a little bit more, Bernie Sanders' economic advisor, Stephanie Kelton, is one of the leading figures in the modern money theory economics school. And when I hear about and read stuff like this, $15 an hour minimum wage and indexing it to the median wage growth thereafter, I really get the feeling, I'm sorry, progressive people, I really get the feeling that Bernie Sanders does not get MMT. So I've had Warren Mosler on a couple times to talk modern money theory, and when we were talking about some of the basics, particularly when we were going into hyperinflation, because that's always a topic that is brought up with modern money theory, because a lot of the things that MMT first of all says we can do and B suggests we should do, or the people who subscribe to MMT suggest that we should do, one of the main criticisms are people say, well, that would cause hyperinflation. And well, when we dig down into how the actual operations of the economy work, we see, well, hyperinflation has few specific requirements for something like that to happen, and none of which is happening in the United States right now. But if we're looking at this, increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour and indexing it to median wage growth. So the article says, and I think this is quoting Sanders, the current federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, is a starvation wage that must be increased to a living wage, at least $15 an hour. I'm not sure why 15 is a living wage. I certainly couldn't live off of it. This would give more than 40 million Americans a raise and would generate more than $100 billion in higher wages throughout the country. Now, I mean, I'm not going to get into the fact that this would raise a lot of prices for employers, cause people to not be able to hire people, make a lot of small businesses go out of business. Okay, I'm not even going to talk about that. I'm going to address Bernie Sanders on the economic level that he is purportedly supposed to be coming from, which is modern money theory, which his economic advisor is one of the main figureheads and proponents of. Warren Mosler who is also he's the modern money theory guy. He's like the source of the modern idea of modern money theory. Specifically went over that one of the big what's the word I want? Potential sources of hyperinflation is if you ever index wages to something else. And he gave an example. I believe this was in a conversation with me and Nima. I believe it was Argentina. I might be wrong on that. I'll have to go back. It was a South American country. Pretty sure it was Argentina. That one of the reasons they experienced hyperinflation at one point, or very strong inflation, is that they had indexed, I believe it was federal workers' wages to some consumer price index or something or other. And this is what happens, is that if you have the consumer price index, or whatever this was, the wages were linked to, if some bump happens and makes prices go up, which turns around and makes these wages go up, wages go up, and then costs go up, which makes the index go up, which makes the wages go up, and you very quickly can get into a spiral where one's going up, which causes the other one to go up, which causes this one to go up, which can lead to hyperinflation. Now, it's not the only thing, it's not the only problem that causes it, but it is a big factor. Now, if you have a $15 an hour, if you want to raise the minimum wage and then index it based on the median, well, when you raise the minimum wage, it raises the median. And if you raise the median and it's indexed to the minimum wage, you're going to raise the minimum wage. And if you raise that, it's going to, affect the median. And I mean, particularly if you raise the minimum wage and just like annihilates, well, I mean, if you go from $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour and you annihilate all those entry-level jobs, well, you just massively shifted the median. If all those small, little low-paying jobs disappear, well, then you're going to have to raise the minimum wage, which is going to raise the median, and raise the minimum wage. You're going to cut out more people from the bottom, and this is totally hyperinflationary, and it's something that your personal economic advisor should know better about. So I don't know what you're on, Bernie, but that one's pretty bad. Number 2, a path toward Medicare for all. The Medicare for All bill, widely supported in the Senate, has a 4-year phase-in period on the way to guaranteeing health care for every man, woman, and child. Over the first year, it would lower the Medicare eligibility age from 65 to 55, cover dental, hearing, and vision care for seniors, provide health care to every young person in the United States, and lower the cost of prescription drugs. Now, there's 2 things I want to say, which are 2 things that I want to bring up, which makes me very, very sympathetic to this, which is particularly since Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, which just got deemed as unconstitutional by a federal judge. Woo! We'll see how well that sticks, but better than that not happening. Particularly since Obamacare, the healthcare system has been so radically fucked. I mean, not that it wasn't fucked before, but I mean, this has been like exponential fuckery, that it's hollowed out the middle class, so the only people who can get healthcare are people who are so poor, where the state essentially covers everything, or people who are rich enough, they're like, yeah, I can afford it. Or if you're in Congress and you just get like special healthcare for free. And so you get the situation where the middle class is getting hollowed out more and more and more. And so, they're dealing with these incredibly skyrocketing premiums that pay for less and less and less, and that have these deductibles that are like, what's the fucking point? So, and a lot of people going out with, particularly since the mandate's gone, but even when the mandate was still there, people were simply choosing to pay the fine because it was cheaper than dealing with the healthcare itself. So, and the fact that people aren't, it's becoming so difficult to get this healthcare. Personally, I usually pay most of my healthcare out of pocket because it's cheaper to me than buying the insurance. Getting access to any sort of healthcare has just become insane. So something by saying, okay, we'll just have the government take care of everything. I mean, I can see why it really sounds like something better than now. And in fact, I would agree, at least temporarily, it would be better than now. Now, and remember, if this is the first time you're watching this, if this is the first time you're watching me and you've never heard of modern money theory and you're thinking, oh my God, how can the government pay for this? Go back and check out some of my other videos on modern money theory, particularly me and Nima Majur of economicsjunkie.com have started a podcast called Amagi, which we're spending a lot of time going over the details and evidence supporting the ideas of modern money theory, which points out, it observes, that government spending does not depend on taxation. Government doesn't need your taxes because it creates money out of nowhere. It can't possibly need them in order to spend. It only needs them in order to give value to the money in the first place, which means there's no constraint on federal government spending via taxes. There are other constraints, but taxes is not one of them, and inflation works much differently from what classical or neoclassical economics would say, or what even Austrian economics would say. That's as far as I'm going to go here. But my point is, the government, yes, could absolutely afford Medicare for all. However, I still don't think it's a good idea, and here's why. Because the incentives that are set up when you have the government do anything is you set up a situation where there's no incentive to do better. There's no incentive to save resources. There's no incentive to make it any cheaper. In fact, there's huge incentives to do it otherwise, because once someone knows that the government is footing the bill, they're going to inflate that bill because for two reasons. One, they know there's going to be like a 90-day or 180-day waiting period to actually get paid, and so they're going to have to deal with the bureaucratic process of getting that paycheck. But the second one is they know that the government isn't really in tune with how much things are supposed to cost, and you need like legislative or bureaucratic authority to make adjustments or change things, so things just kind of get clunked up. So when we're saying, okay, we want the government to take care of all of healthcare, what we're saying is we want things to become less and less and less and less efficient. It doesn't matter that the government can, in quotes, afford it. Furthermore, so going back to what this said here, he wants to be able to guarantee health care for every man, woman, and child. I'm sorry, Bernie Sanders, and I'm sorry, honestly, everybody listening to this, it's not just the health care system is broken in the sense that we've radically screwed up the way that people pay for it. It's broken because it's literally not health care. The healthcare system today, people blame it on Western medicine, but I don't think that's an accurate statement. I think the statement is an institutionalization of Western medicine, largely because the government has taken it over and given very bad incentives on things. But the healthcare system does not address the sources of disease. And this is what the free market is trying to solve, is that there's a larger and larger amount of doctors, whether they call themselves natural doctors or functional doctors, or even I would say the biohackers like Tim Ferriss and Dave Asprey are coming out going, okay, what are the sources of these problems that we're having? How much of it has to do with diet? How much of it has to do with simply supplements? How much of it has to do with like the mold in your house? How much of it has to do with exercise? How much of it has to do with lifestyle? And one show, a podcast I really recommend checking out if this is something that you're interested in, is Beyond Wellness Radio. It's a podcast that's done by two, they call themselves functional doctors, and my best understanding of a functional doctor is they look at the systems in the human body and making sure that the systems are in order to address whatever symptom is being expressed. And if you listen to these guys, and these are guys doing research and actually seeing patients and recommending and treating patients. So they're doing the research and actually seeing the effects of what they're doing. They say that in 90% of the cases of people that come to them, 90, that probably came up backwards in the video, 90%, by the time they look at the gut, by the time they look at the thyroid, and by the time they look at the adrenals, whatever problems that the person came in with are gone. What that tells me is that 90% of the healthcare problems that we are experiencing in the United States are diet, lifestyle, and stress related. So we have this healthcare system. Everybody's screaming up and down about how are people going to get healthcare? How are people going to get access to doctors? How are people going to get their pharmaceuticals? How when 90% of that doesn't have to happen. 90% of that doesn't have to happen, and our entire healthcare system, I don't care how it's paid for, is incapable of addressing that fact. So what Medicare for All would do is lock the system into place. Like, for example, as we all know up in Canada, it's illegal to pay for your own healthcare. I think the only other two countries on Earth that are like that are Cuba and North Korea. It's illegal to pay for your own healthcare. So if you think as I do about the current healthcare system, where I say, okay, becoming healthy is not a matter of going to the doctor because they're not set up to address it. Yeah, they can, if I get in a car wreck and I need my morphine and I got a broken arm, they're great. If I need a open heart surgery, fine, whatever. but they don't lead into, okay, why did you need that open heart surgery to begin with? I mean, with a car wreck, obviously, just don't get in a car wreck. But Medicare for All would lock this system into place, so it would become harder and harder and harder for these other people who are really looking into the sources of disease and the sources of why we get sick, and offering real solutions to it. And, I mean, theoretically, you can make all that illegal, make it so you can't get access to these people, and you could say, okay, you know, they're really expensive and our insurance doesn't cover it, but at least it's something. The information's out there. So, whether or not we should have Medicare for all, again, I understand the emphasis behind pushing it, particularly if the government's spending isn't an issue. The government can always afford it because they create money out of nothing. And that's the only way they spend for things, by the way. There is no such thing as the government collecting tax receipts or tax payments and spending those tax payments, federal government. They collect the money's destroyed, and then whenever they spend, they create it out of nothing. That's the way it works. Again, listen to our other stuff, or my other stuff, to learn a little bit more about that. Okay, number 3. Bold action to combat climate change. Oh my god. So the report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has made it clear that we have just 12 years to substantially cut the amount of carbon in our atmosphere, or our planet will suffer irreversible damage. Congress must pass legislation that shifts our energy system away from fossil fuels and toward energy efficiency and renewable energy. We can lead the planet in combating climate change and in the process create millions of good paying jobs. Now, okay, the IPCC, these are the motherfuckers who, what was his name? Phil Jones, who got his email hacked in, like, it was 2011 or 2012 or something back then, where he is purposefully misusing data, particularly to hide the medieval warm period. He is conspiring to change the peer review process in order to make sure that people who present evidence contrary to the public opinion of climate change, you know, the propagandized term of that, man-made climate change, global warming, whatever the cool kids are calling it these days, making sure that the peer review process is set up so they can block contrary research papers out from the scientific literature. That's the guy who did, I don't know if he still is, that's the guy who at least did head the IPCC. So anytime anybody ever quotes information from the IPCC, you could just throw it in a dumpster fire. It's totally propaganda. It's completely worthless. Now, 12 years to substantially cut, or else we'll see irreversible damage. How many times? I mean, according to Al Gore, weren't we already supposed to have seen that irreversible damage due to carbon fucking dioxide? Okay, so climate change is a real thing, and there are real climate problems. Carbon dioxide is not one of them. So if you're still on the CO2 is bad bandwagon, I don't know a simpler way to put this. You have bought the propaganda, you've swallowed it hook, line, and sinker without any sort of critical thinking filter to look at it. Carbon dioxide is a essential part of life. It's as important as water and oxygen. It's plant food. And there are natural cycles that happen in the Earth's history. If you go back millions of years, there's times when the carbon dioxide levels are like 20 or 30 times higher than they are now. Like 6,000, 8,000 parts per million. Right now we're at like 400 or something. And this idea that because we burnt some oil, the whole world is just gonna fall apart. It's just ludicrous. And furthermore, again, addressing the fact that Bernie Sanders, economic advisor, is an MMT figurehead. She should understand, and I would think therefore Bernie Sanders should understand, that the biggest economic threat to any human population is austerity. Climate change legislation, as it's been thrown at us for I don't know how many years now, is nothing more than austerity, because CO2, because it's a fundamental unit of life. It's like oxygen, it's like water, it's like sunlight. To turn around and say, okay, that is pollution, that is toxic, that is something we have to control and diminish. What you're saying is life is toxic. Life is something that we have to control and diminish. So when you're saying, okay, we have to take all this technology and all this industry and clamp down on it because it's creating too much carbon dioxide, all you want to do is kill people. That's all it is. It's just austerity to kill people. So fuck you, Bernie Sanders, for promulgating this bullshit. This is disgusting, anti-human bullshit. Look up Al Gore and his connections to the Club of Rome and read Limits to Growth, or at least the important parts from it, which have specifically denoted the fact that this whole climate change, this whole human beings are destroying the environment, was invented to make human beings hate themselves. So if you are a human being who thinks human beings are disgusting because they create pollution which destroys the planet, you have bought the bullshit propaganda from our globalist overlords. Great. So Bernie Sanders, shut up about climate change. Okay, I think we're on number 4. Fixing our broken criminal justice system. We must end the absurdity of the United States having more people in jail than any other country on earth. We must invest in jobs and education for our young people, not more jails and incarceration. So the first half of this, I completely fucking agree. What is it, per capita, we have the highest prison population on earth. I think China has more actual people, but if you look at it per population, we're the winners. So I completely agree. A lot of these people are in here for nonviolent drug charges. Prison reform is a great goddamn idea. Now, the second half of this, I think Bernie Sanders shoots himself in the foot, where he says, we must invest in jobs and education for our young people, not more jails and incarceration. Well, will you please address the fact that the contractors who build our schools are also the same contractors who build our prisons, and that the current situation of the educational system is designed to be like a prison and designed to remove critical thinking capacities from our children and from our population. So pick one. Number 5, comprehensive immigration reform. The American people want to protect young people in the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, program, and to move toward comprehensive immigration reform for the more than 11 million people in our country who are undocumented, and that's exactly what we should do. There's nothing specific in here enough for me to agree with. I mean, I can assume what this means is he wants all the DACA and all the 11 million people here to have a legal way to stay here, even though they broke the law in coming here. If that's the case, I couldn't disagree more. I say, kick them all out. They're here illegally. They bring a whole host of problems, and I don't care if you want to look at these problems from an identitarian standpoint or a racial standpoint, that there's a genetic issue with mixing these races, or if you want to look at it from a culture standpoint, where you can say, okay, Latin American culture does not coincide with Western values, or you want to simply make the welfare standpoint, or whatever standpoint you want to make, I don't care. Get them out. I am part of the American people. That's what I say. Get them out. Okay, number 6. Progressive tax reform. At a time of massive and growing inequality in both income and wealth, Congress must pass legislation which requires wealthy people and large corporations to begin paying their fair share of taxes. Still no answer as to how much that fair share is, but we shall continue. It is unacceptable that there are a large, extremely profitable corporations in the country that do not pay a nickel in federal income tax. Now, that do not pay a nickel part is hyperlinked, and I clicked on the hyperlink, and it goes into profitable companies, no taxes, here's how they did it. And if you, I'll link this in the description below as well. This article keeps going back and forth between income and corporate taxes. So, complaining that the United States has one of the world's highest corporate tax levels, President Trump and congressional Republicans have repeatedly vowed to shrink it. Yet, if the level is so high, why have many companies' income tax bills added up to 0? Now, to write this article like this shows that this article and the Truth Dig or Washington Post or whoever was linking to it, I guess Bernie Sanders was the one bringing it up, has zero understanding of the tax code. Zero understanding of the tax code. Corporate taxes and income taxes aren't the same thing. Okay? You pay them both. I don't know why people who don't understand taxes open their mouths about this. I guess it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. But so when you have 35% corporate taxes, or now that it's 21% taxes, you pay that, then you pay the income taxes. So it's a double whammy. So corporate taxes are typically what you pay in lieu of self-employment or FICA taxes, depending on what sort of entity that you are. And so when a corporation has write-offs, and I mean, we can get into how the tax code is corrupt and nasty and full of so much insanity that if you know how to take advantage of it, you can take advantage of it. If you don't, it takes advantage of you. I completely agree. However, please stop conflating corporate and income taxes. And again, Bernie Sanders, you're supposed to be an MMT guy. Almost all the MMT people I know, particularly the ones on the left, say the corporate tax is a regressive tax, or excuse me, it's a pass-through tax. It doesn't do anything except make things more expensive on the bottom, because if you have these corporate taxes, all you do is you raise prices to the end consumer to pay for them. So again, you should know this, and you should be telling people this. If you really want people to be better off, again, lowering those corporate tax rates are what's going to be able to bring the corporations back and to lower the prices for everyone else, because they don't do a damn thing. And particularly, you should know, because again, he says Congress must, or wealthy people and large corporations need to pay their fair share of taxes. Why? I thought you're an MMT guy. I thought you understood that the government doesn't need taxes in order to fund its spending. So, if you should understand that corporate taxes are simply a pass-through tax to the end consumer, because all the MMT people say this, even the progressive MMT people say this, and two, that like one of the number one points of MMT is that federal taxes don't fund spending. Why do you even care? Why do you even care? You could say, okay, well, wealthy people shouldn't be so wealthy. Well, then maybe you shouldn't have 6 fucking houses. Now, should you? Or whatever it is. A lot of houses. More than I have. So, what point are we on? 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, we're on 7. Number 7. A $1 trillion infrastructure plan. Every day, Americans drive to work on potholed roads and crumbling bridges and ride in overcrowded buses and subways. Children struggle to concentrate in overcrowded classrooms. Workers are unable to find affordable housing. The structures that most Americans don't see are also in disrepair, from spotty broadband and an outdated electric grid to toxic drinking water and dilapidated levees and dams. Congress should pass a $1 trillion infrastructure plan to address these needs while creating up to 15 million good-paying jobs in the process. I actually 100% agree with this. Once I understood MMT, and I realized that government, not just recently, but all throughout the history of monetary systems, that money is a state-created concept, and that without government spending, the government has to spend money into existence before there's even any money to be had. So there has to be some form of government spending if we're going to have a government. And you know, you can say, well, Dylan, I thought you were an anarchist and you don't want any government. You know, one thing at a time, please. Right now we have it and we have to deal with it. And I could talk about, you know, how I view a world without government at some point in the future. But, I mean, that's like way after I'm dead, and I could do another video about that later. Right now, we live in a country, there are nation-states, and there are, nation-states don't like each other a lot of times. And just because we might create a free market anarchist paradise in the United States doesn't mean we won't get immediately invaded by people who aren't free market lovers of anarchy. So we have to deal with this nation state for now, and a nation state has to have infrastructure. And so if we're going to have government spending, I think it needs to be spent on infrastructure, not the schools though. that's a horrible goddamn idea, because we've seen what you've been able to do with schools, and I think the federal government needs to get the hell out of the way of schools. Stop making these prison systems, and man, just go watch the Ultimate History Lesson and interview with John Taylor Gatto. I'll link that one below as well, to see what exactly the history of the public educational system has been, and why you should never, ever, ever over your dead body ever send your child to a public school. Ever. So, number 8. Lowering the price of prescription drugs. Americans pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs because, unlike other countries, the United States doesn't directly regulate the price of medicine. That's why they're so expensive. So the House should pass legislation to require Medicare. The House should pass legislation to require Medicare to negotiate for lower drug prices and allow patients, pharmacists, and wholesalers to purchase low-cost prescription drugs from Canada and other countries. It should also pass legislation to make sure that Americans don't pay more for prescription drugs than citizens do in other major countries. Okay, so this one's kind of a quagmire. First one, I'll say, yeah, I completely agree that wholesalers should be allowed to buy these prescription drugs from other countries. It's completely goddamn ridiculous that they can't. But this idea that, these drugs they're just so expensive because the government doesn't regulate the prices. Well, Bernie, the government kind of already does regulate the prices. In order to get a drug passed, what is it, $1 billion in 15 years to get the permits by the FDA to get this drug passed, and then it gets in, then it gets into the completely government-controlled Obamacare system, where there is no opportunity for choice, and then they could just require whatever prices that they want. Now, of course, this is all going over what I just talked about before, which is probably in 90% of all cases, people don't need prescription drugs. They just need a change in diet, supplement, lifestyle, and stress. Yeah. Complicated question, but I think the majority of your solutions are shit. Number 9. Making public colleges and universities tuition-free and substantially reducing student debt. In a highly competitive global economy, we must have the best educated workers in the world. Every young person in America, regardless of income, must have the opportunity to receive education they need to get a decent job and make it into the middle class. The House should pass a College for All Act to make public colleges and universities tuition-free and substantially reduce student debt. So, I think I've got kind of a unique take on the student debt situation. I support a full jubilee for everybody that has student debt. All of it, gone. Provided that the government completely get out of financing students and universities. So, we've gone through this public educational system that said, oh, yeah, you got to go to school, get good grades, and then you'll get a good job. Like Bernie Sanders here. What did he say? Every young person in America, regardless of income, must have the opportunity to receive an education they need to get a decent job and to make it into the middle class. Where is this education we need to get a decent job, Bernie? What school am I supposed to go to that will get me the education to get a decent job? Have you not checked the news in the last 10 years since the economic crash of 2008? There weren't any jobs. There haven't been. And, I mean, the Trump economy is improving things a lot, but we're still in a situation for people who are graduating college with like $100,000 in debt. How are they supposed to pay that back? And remember, go watch my mortgages are bullshit video, by the way, to understand this a little bit better. When someone's $100,000 in debt, in fact, I'm going to open up a mortgage calculator right now. Give me just a second. It's worth it, I promise. So I have an app called Carl's Mortgage Calculator. And let's just say, so there's inputs and stuff. Hey, ooh, someone's texting me. You don't get to see who that is. There are inputs here. Woo, focus on that to figure out how much something is going to cost, how much a loan is going to cost at a certain interest rate over a certain period of time. So if we had a $100,000 loan at an 8% interest rate over 30 years, I can actually go over to this chart and see if I made those payments over 30 years, how much would be interest and how much would be principal. So at 8% over 30 years, all the money I would pay would be 62.1% interest and 37.9%. Ooh, you don't get to see that either. Principal. So the $100,000 we were just talking about, that's just the principal. That's just that 37.8%. If we go over to sum, the total interest, if we look down at the bottom, oh, come on, focus. Okay, I'll just tell you what it is. The total interest comes into at $164,000. So the total amount that you would be paying if you had a $100,000 student debt for 30 years at 8% interest, if you paid every payment over 30 years, you would actually end up paying $264,000 on your student debt. What job is it exactly that is supposed to cover? Now, Bernie Sanders is saying, okay, well, people shouldn't have to take on that burden. I completely agree. People shouldn't have to take on that burden. And I think it's the government's responsibility to issue an apology to all the people that they forced to go through the government educational system. And they all encourage to say, okay, if you go to college, you're going to have this great job waiting for you when you get out. Issue an apology to all of them by saying, we are sorry that we convinced you to put yourself not $100,000 in debt, $264,000 in debt that you can't go bankrupt out of. Here's the thing. And we've gone over this, me and Nima, in our Amagi podcast, looking at the history of debt systems. Is that debt slavery? We talk about debt slavery these days, but I don't think we fully understand it, because debt slavery originally meant if you couldn't pay your debt, you got taken as a slave in order to pay it back, and your family got taken as a slave as well. And it was an issue, particularly back in ancient Sumeria, when we either saw the development or redevelopment of these things, depending on which historical timeline you want to look at, that there would be these crises where so many people were in debt and being sold into slavery that like the entire population, not the entire, obviously there was some masters, but a large percentage of the population would lose all their land to go into slavery, and that the Sumerian leaders would regularly, like every 50 years, have to do a jubilee. This is why Jubilee, where everyone's forgiven of their debts, is such an important aspect of the Bible. Because debt meant slavery. If you couldn't pay your debts, you got sold as a slave. So, Jubilee was this freeing of peoples from literal slavery that had been induced upon them by this debt. And, of course, the debt ultimately comes from the government, because they are the ones that create money and demand taxes. So right now, what we're seeing is entire generations of people graduating these wonderful public school systems. And I'm including college into this public school. I know there's private ones, but you get my point. They still follow a curriculum that's more or less decided by the public educational system. They get all the way through this, and they graduate completely in debt, and they can't go bankrupt out of it. Even though you can go bankrupt out of a gambling debt or a house debt or credit card debt or whatever, or business debt or whatever else. They can't go bankrupt out of it. And I've actually been reading articles that look this up. In fact, I should have looked it up before I started this video. That there are 20 states right now, 20, that will take away your driver's license if you stop paying your student loans. This is approaching that Sumerian style debt slavery, because particularly in the United States, anyone here knows, if you live outside of a major city, you must have a car. Vehicle is relatively equivalent to freedom. That's kind of why you kind of see this American culture thing where we're really into our big trucks and driving around and having cars, and the Europeans are like, why are you so obsessed about cars? Because our country is like 4 zillion times bigger than anywhere that you're living, and it would mostly be impossible to set up a public transportation system across the whole country, because there's so much space and so few people in that space. You have to have a vehicle just to get around. And so we're propagandizing our students, pushing them through this this school system where the schools are built by the same people who build the prisons. We're pushing them through this system, telling them that they need to do this thing where they get a zillion million dollars in debt, and then they're like, "Oh, we're gonna take your driver's license away, and you can never get bankrupt yourself out of it. So have fun for the rest of your life. Good luck getting married. Good luck buying a house. Good luck finding that job that doesn't exist anymore because it's no way that you could pay off this $250,000 of interest. Good luck with all of that." So yeah, I totally support a Jubilee-style clearing of all student debts, making it so that in the future, student debts could be bankrupted out of if it even exist at all, and stop having the government have the ability to unequivocally finance debts or a student debt, because there's nothing where a financial institution says, okay, we need to look at what degree that you're getting so we can ascertain what sort of job that you're going to get, so we can ascertain what sort of ability that you're going to have to pay this back. There has to be that system of incentives put in if we're going to have student tuition be financed at all. And furthermore, if we take out all that fucking federal spending, the tuition should drop anyway, because that's one of the major reasons why tuition has gone up so radically to begin with. So, yeah, Jubilee style freedom, debt release from current debt bondage of student debt, and I don't know, how do you just like rip the educational system off the face of the planet? I'm not sure how to do that, but this idea that we need to pay for students in tuition to go to college so they can become worthless sacks of shit that can only scream about oppression when they get out. I mean, seriously, what are you going to go to college for? What is the thing? Somebody tell me the thing that you learn in college that helps you get a job, that helps you be self-sufficient, that helps you learn how to raise a family, that helps you, buy a house and finance things and be productive within your community. Somebody tell me what class I was supposed to take in college that taught me any of that, please. Okay, number 10. Expanding Social Security. When 1 out of 5 seniors is trying to get by on less than $13,500 a year, we must expand Social Security so that every American retire with dignity and security. The House should pass legislation to expand Social Security benefits and extend its solvency for the next 60 years by requiring the wealthiest Americans, those making more than $250,000 a year, to pay their fair share of Social Security taxes. Fuck. MMT progressives, stop the bullshit that Bernie Sanders is some sort of MMT savior for you guys. He either doesn't understand it in the slightest, or is understands it and is saying this crap anyway. So, first of all, I do agree, at least in the short term, of increasing Social Security for seniors. It's a shitty system, and it sucks that we've gotten in a situation where we do have grandma and grandpa often like eating cat food. Yes, that was hyperbole. Eating cat food to survive because they're trying to make it on $13,500 a year. I know some people who, I mean, they try to live on $700 a month. That's not even $13,500. That's $8,400 a year. I can't do that arithmetic too well anymore after taking chemistry classes. Yeah, arithmetic's hard for me now. Anyway, yeah, I would say expand this. The government doesn't need any more tax revenue. It doesn't have to sell any more bonds. Well, I mean, under the current system it does, but that doesn't matter. It's just creating securities out of nowhere. Did an interview with Warren Mosler explaining how that works. Increasing Social Security has nothing to do with doing anything to the tax code. We could do completely zero to the tax code, and all you have to do is say, okay, give the seniors more money. And that could do it. There's no such thing as solvency for the Social Security Administration, because there's no such thing as solvency for the federal government. These are the MMT basics, and again, if you want the evidence and the arguments about this, go listen to my other stuff. But ultimately, yeah, I think Social Security is a shitty idea, but we are in a situation where we have millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people just scraping by. And we don't need to tax the wealthiest people to make them pay their fair share in order to give these people a better mode of life while we try to figure out a better way of doing things so we don't get in this situation in the first place. And, honestly, I think a big one is the culture where the family doesn't take care of the parents anymore. We particularly in the United States, we have this culture where, well, I live in my house now, Dad, Mom, you live over there, you're not my problem anymore, go away, I'll see you at Christmas. And I mean, that might sound bad from the kids, but the parents are doing the same thing, like, son and daughter, go over there, I'm taking care of myself, you got your problems, go away. We've really lost the familial connection and the familial support that is pretty much in every other culture on Earth for the entirety of history, where you do support each other. It's not like you just connect into the greater society and everybody gets this equal stuff. You have to have familial support. So, those are Bernie Sanders' 10 points for the Democrats, and I completely agree. Just having 10 points is a lot better than Orange Man bad, but I just want to say, dear progressives, I think you really need to stop seeing Bernie Sanders as your savior and get your shit together, because this guy is either he doesn't understand what he's talking about, or he's willfully deceitful toward you. That's all I have for now, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.